all British colonies has been outlawed. So Britain, in the Age of Empire, has some, I would call them definitely mixed messages. What are some of the mixed messages of the British Empire? It's not spring break yet. We're so close, but it's not there yet.
Talk about tyrants falling while, they had freedom from their nation, they're tyrants to colonies.
Exactly. So obviously in this song, the British are the good guys, right? And what kind of values are they defending out in the globe? And it says, we're the good guys. We are meant to encircle the globe. We're meant to have this empire upon which the sun never sets. So what makes them the good guys? What values are they promoting in Rule Britannia and in these other songs? Freedom, liberty, and in particular, and this is what confuses us, I think, often as Americans, because we kind of think we have the copyright on liberty. I mean, there it is, it's all over the Constitution, there it stands. Liberty, right, we're the liberty guys. So, for the sake of keeping them differentiated, I'm going to call this English liberty, which often they did call it English liberty. So why is it that the English think that they have essentially cornered the market on the idea of liberty? What have they got going on? Constitutional monarchy, and what else? Somebody said it. The English Bill of Rights, 1689, passed just after good old William of Orange comes in on his horse to London, right? The Protestant monarch, saving them from the Stuarts. So long before we had a Bill of Rights in the United States, the English did it first. They have a constitutional monarchy, and they have a very strong government. Not just a very strong government. In other places in Europe where there are parliamentary-style bodies or government bodies, they're still controlled, even in the 19th century, by the aristocracy. If you think of Prussia, for example, is a good example of this. Prussia, which will become what in 1871? Germany. So the Prussian Junkers. Now, Britain, however, has kind of flipped what used to be the hierarchy, and now, which is the more powerful of the two bodies of Parliament? Commons. Actually, by the 19th century, it's called being kicked upstairs. When you're promoted to the House of Lords, you're ennobled, it's actually a way to retire you, for the most part.
Is that what they did with just like all the old white guys that didn't really want to deal with it?
All the old guys whose politics had kind of seen their day, you just made them an earl. You ennobled them, and they got to sit in the House of Lords, where, of course, they had very little power whatsoever, and even less so after the First World War, but we'll get to that. Okay, so Britain has this vision of itself as being the representative of liberty and freedom, which is, you can imagine why then the American Revolution came as such a shock. But we're the good guys. So what happens to empire after the American Revolution? This is where we get into the 1800s. And we've already learned some key and important lessons. In part, the hard way, right, through the American Revolution. And one of the things that Pitt scrambles to do after the Revolution, and this is what a lot of people that did the big question on the prime ministers kind of, or even the revolutionary question sometimes missed, it's not just the people who put forward the ideas of liberty, people like John Wilkes, that helped the long revolution. It's also key actors like William Pitt the Younger, who through his, it's called Pitt's Terror, through about 20 years of repression in the late reign of George III, managed to kind of stomp out free speech and liberty through various ways in British government, and actually pulled back on Britain's freedom. So, empire after the American Revolution, is it a blessing or a burden? It certainly seems to be a moneymaker in the 19th century. And you can see the maps of just how far this was spread in your Cunliffe book. What did it take then to keep the empire? What is it that Britain does right? What is it that they do wrong to win and keep empire in the 1800s? And despite its seeming and certainly on the surface success, what is it that critics continue to see as wrong about the British Empire? So, bless you. Oh, there's my favorite. Overseas trade map. Give this back to slightly crooked empire. Okay, so you can see, again, just how much trade is going on. So that obviously money was one of the big draws for empire. Well, let's talk about blessing or a burden. What are the good and sort of bad sides of empire? Well, it was big enough by the early 1800s. You can see exactly just how elaborate it had become. And throughout most of the 1800s, what the British did were they solidified gains they had already made, like control of India, for example, and also in dealing with China. Yeah, you can see the little money bag of China right there. So what did they do to keep empire in the 19th century? Well, in the 1830s and 40s, one of the things they did, especially in China, was to fight the Opium War. This was one of the first signs of just how important economics were to the British Empire. How did they do that? What did they do? What happened? What caused the Opium War? So the British aren't just sending trading ships, but they're sending their substantial military to China. How have both traditionally the Chinese and the Japanese empires felt about European incursion? Did not like it. And they were rather closed cultures. Japan even officially closes its doors to foreigners a couple centuries until, what does it take for Japan to open their doors again to Westerners? I'm sorry? Yeah, Commodore Perry, right? It all starts with a squabble over the U.S. Navy trying to return some Japanese sailors. And then they're not so happy when they get fired upon, and it all kind of escalates from there, and then Perry sails into Japan and forcibly opens them back to trade. Well, now China had been trading with Britain for some time, but it was not a trade that worked out well for Britain. The balance of trade was definitely down for the British and up for the Chinese. What did the Chinese have and make in the 19th century? And you can see that a little bit on this map that was so valuable for the British. Very specific textiles, though. Silks, luxury, right. So this is something that only the very wealthy and the upper classes could afford. It was something, why was it exclusive to China?
And they like kept secret the techniques.
Everybody answered at once, I'm sorry.
I don't feel like centuries they kept secret like the technique with the silk.
The technique, and they also outlawed what?
Exporting the silk.
Yeah, you couldn't take the silkworms out of China. And I think a guy finally smuggled some out in I think it's the top of a cane or something with the eggs. I mean, it's crazy what people did to get these things. So what else are the Chinese producing that the Europeans love? and early Americans as well.
Tea.
Ooh, absolutely, tea. And that's the one that you see on the map. Tea becomes incredibly important to the British Empire. Now, tea is kind of an odd thing. It starts out as an Asian commodity, but gets taken up by the British, and of course the British colonies, the Americans, in the 1700s. It's something that is drunk in polite society, and one of the things that makes tea so wildly popular as a drink is made possible by something that gets produced in the Caribbean. What is that? Sugar. So again, it's not surprising that part of what sparks the American Revolution are the duties on sugar and tea, right? So they don't make sugar in China, but it's important to this tea trade. Also, well, not surprisingly, it was named for the country, China, porcelain. Fine porcelain goods. So China has all of these desirable products that Europeans want. And this is another reason the Chinese largely closed their doors to European trade, because they honestly thought they were barbarians. And you can see that very clearly if you look at Chinese art from the time. In one, I think the Westerners are portrayed as pigs. So yeah, it's not too kind what they thought of the West. Now the British, though, as these become more and more valuable, particularly the tea, they want to keep those trade routes open. They have nothing the Chinese want to buy. I mean, what do the British got, right? They've got some crappy wool, crappy itchy wool. Who wants that? They have some of the worst pottery in the world. Can't even sell it at a craft fair. It's bad. It was really poorly made. Until, of course, who opens that up in Britain? It starts to compete with the Chinese. Josiah Wedgwood, our good friend, Josiah W. But again, that doesn't happen until the latter part of the 1700s. Well, the British, therefore, can only trade off things like gold, but that's not a good balance of trade. But they finally find a product the Chinese love. What is it? Tobacco's okay, but this is better than tobacco. Even more addictive. Opium. Now, the Chinese had already smoked opium in a leisure sense, but they had never had a huge supply of it. So it was something that was done a little bit, but not necessarily a lot, and it wasn't something that was widespread opium smokers throughout the population. Until the British get their little grubby paws on what area of the world? India, and over here to the Middle East, where it's fine, opium poppy growing territory. Not only do they streamline opium production and turn it into factory production, but they hire special government inspectors to make sure the opium is pure and that the people that are making it aren't stealing it. Largely Indian laborers. And then they put it on boats as fast as they can and they sell it to China. Well, the Chinese, it doesn't take them long to catch on that this is a bit of a problem, socially speaking, and it's breaking their economy, it's breaking apart families. So, wisely, the emperor outlaws it. So what do the British traders then do? Sorry?
Smuggle it in.
Well,
Sell it.
you could smuggle it, but then the Chinese might send, police, soldiers, whatever after you.
We do the same.
They go upon, if you remember back to some of those values we talked about with all these great thinkers, right? Bentham, John Stuart Mill, liberalism. Liberalism in the 19th century isn't just liberty, equality, fraternity that it was in the 18th century. Liberalism proper, and we're going to get more into that on Wednesday because we're going to talk about politics on Wednesday. Liberalism versus the Tories, the conservatives. What is the economic stance of liberalism? What'd you say?
Free market.
Free market, free trade. Free trade. Government, keep your hands off of trade. because a